I was standing in the doorway of my son's house, a grocery bag cutting into my fingers, when my daughter-in-law snapped in front of everyone, "You are not allowed to touch anything in my kitchen." Her voice echoed off the cabinets I once helped choose. Before I could even process the words, she yanked the spatula out of my hand like I was some stranger who wandered in off the street. My chest tightened, not with anger, but disbelief. For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. That kitchen had once been mine in every way that mattered. Every Sunday, I cooked there, feeding my family, wiping those same counters clean. I paid for half the appliances. I bought the plates stacked neatly in her cabinets. I stood there now, feeling small, treated like dirt in a house I helped build. The smell of dinner still hung in the air, and suddenly it felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. "This is my house now," she said sharply. "I don't need you rearranging things." Then, softer but sharper somehow, "Please just sit down and don't touch anything." I looked at my son, waiting for him to say something, anything. He stared at the floor like it might save him. My grandson watched from the hallway, silent, confused, learning something I never wanted him to learn. My hands trembled as I slowly set the spatula down, like I was surrendering more than metal and plastic. In that moment, I felt years of love shrink into something painfully fragile. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "And don't forget," she whispered, "none of this is yours anymore." That sentence sliced through me. It landed deep, sharp, final, settling into my bones in a way I knew would never leave. Stay with me till the end, because what happened after that moment shocked my entire family. And if you love emotional revenge stories about betrayal, injustice, and quiet payback, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more. Because that day was never really about a kitchen. It was about years of entitlement, control, and silence I mistook for peace. It was about how easily kindness can be mistaken for weakness. She thought she owned everything under that roof. She didn't know there were things still very much in my hands, waiting quietly for the right moment to matter. I stood there breathing, smiling, already changing inside forever. She told me not to touch her kitchen. So I decided to touch the one thing she wanted most. My name is Patricia, and this is my story. Before everything changed, my life moved in gentle, predictable rhythms. I was a mother first, always had been, and later I became the kind of grandmother who believed love was something you proved through action. After my husband passed, my son became my whole world. I raised him alone, working longer hours than I should have, skipping rest, skipping joy, telling myself it was temporary. Everything I did was for him, and I never kept score. When he married Melissa, I truly believed I was gaining a daughter. I welcomed her with open arms, paid for parts of the wedding quietly, helped where I could without being asked. I cooked meals when she was tired, watched my grandson so they could have evenings to themselves, and smiled when she thanked me, even when the thanks felt rushed. Their house slowly became a second home to me, a place filled with noise, footsteps, and warmth. That kitchen was the heart of it all. Every Sunday, I cooked there, stirring pots while my grandson tugged at my sleeve. I bought the dishwasher when theirs broke, chipped in for the refrigerator, and handed Melissa cash for the renovation without expecting my name attached to anything. I thought that was what family did. You give, and you don't remind people you gave. At first, Melissa seemed grateful. She laughed at my stories, asked for recipes, and told me how lucky my son was to have a mother like me. But there were moments I brushed aside too quickly. A tight smile when I moved a bowl. A comment about liking things a certain way. A joke about how times were different now. I told myself I was being sensitive, that adjusting to marriage came with stress. I believed patience could smooth anything. I believed respect grew naturally over time. I believed if I stayed helpful and quiet, harmony would protect us all. Those beliefs settled into my bones, solid and unquestioned, becoming the foundation I stood on without ever checking how strong it truly was. My son never complained. He hugged me the same, called me for advice, thanked me for helping. I mistook his silence for balance, not realizing it was the beginning of distance. Looking back, I can see how calm can hide cracks. Everything felt peaceful, loving, and secure on the surface, and I trusted that feeling without question. I had no idea that this comfortable normal was already slipping through my fingers, preparing me for a fall I didn't yet see coming. And soon, those cracks would start showing themselves there. At first, the changes were so small I almost laughed them off. Melissa began correcting me over little things, always with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We usually do it this way," she'd say, sliding something out of my hands. If I set a cup in the wrong cabinet, she moved it back later, making sure I noticed. None of it was loud enough to call disrespect, just sharp enough to sting. The invitations started changing too. Dinners were suddenly planned last minute. Sometimes I'd get a text saying they were too busy after all. When I did come over, the warmth felt thinner, stretched tight. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Laughter softened, then resumed once I stepped away. Melissa began using new words that felt rehearsed. "Boundaries," she'd say, tilting her head kindly. "We're just trying to have our own space." Once, in front of friends, she laughed and added, "You know how parents can be." Everyone smiled. I did too, even though my face felt frozen. My son started changing as well. He still hugged me, still asked how I was, but his eyes didn't stay on mine. When Melissa corrected me, he stayed quiet. When I looked at him for support, he found reasons to leave the room. I told myself he was tired, stressed, trying to keep the peace. Inside, confusion twisted into doubt. Was I doing something wrong? Had I crossed lines without realizing it? I replayed conversations at night, wondering which words I should have swallowed. I apologized more, even when no apology was asked for. I became careful, then quieter, shrinking myself so no one could accuse me of taking up too much space. Then came the questions. Casual at first. Melissa asked about my savings, my old house, the paperwork my husband left behind. "Just curious," she said lightly. "It's smart to plan." Her smile lingered a little too long, her eyes watching me closely. Something cold settled in my stomach, a feeling I couldn't yet name. I told myself not to be suspicious. Family doesn't keep score, I reminded myself. But as I drove home that night, hands tight on the wheel, one thought kept circling my mind. She wasn't just pushing me aside anymore. She was trying to see exactly what I still had. And for the first time, I felt something shift inside me, quiet but unmistakable, a warning that whatever was coming next would not be gentle, and that pretending not to notice would cost me far more than speaking up ever had. By then, Melissa had stopped pretending. The politeness became selective, turned on only when others were watching. Around me, her voice hardened, her patience thinned. She began deciding when I could visit, how long I could stay, and what I was allowed to do once I arrived. "We're trying to keep a routine," she'd say, as if I were an inconvenience she had to schedule around. She started calling the house hers openly. "In my house, we do things this way. I don't like that in my house." Each time she said it, something twisted inside me. Not because I wanted ownership, but because she was erasing me on purpose. I overheard her once in the hallway, her voice low but clear enough. "She's lucky we even let her come over." I stood frozen, my heart pounding, realizing she hadn't even tried to hide it. My son was still there, physically at least. Emotionally, he drifted further away. When Melissa snapped at me, he looked uncomfortable, but he never intervened. Silence became his answer. I began to understand that keeping peace in his marriage mattered more than protecting his mother. That realization hurt more than anything Melissa ever said. Then the conversations shifted. Melissa started bringing up paperwork, casually at first. "You should really simplify things," she suggested over coffee. "It's stressful having so much in your name." She asked about my will, my husband's property, whether everything was updated. She framed it as concern, but there was something sharp underneath it, something hungry. I watched her carefully after that. The way her eyes lingered when money was mentioned. How she smiled when talking about the future, always assuming she'd be part of it. I began doubting myself again. Was I imagining this? Was grief making me suspicious? But my instincts wouldn't quiet down. One afternoon, alone in my house, I pulled out old folders I hadn't touched in years. Deeds, documents, notes written in my husband's careful handwriting. As I read through them, my hands steadied. I realized how much control I still legally held, how little had actually changed despite how small I'd been made to feel. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel confused. I felt alert. Melissa wasn't just pushing me away out of dislike. She had a plan, and I was standing in the way of it. And as I closed those folders, one thought settled clearly in my mind. She had underestimated me, and that mistake was going to matter more than she ever imagined. After that, something inside me began to collapse quietly. Not all at once, not in a dramatic way anyone could see, but slowly, like a house settling into itself after years of unseen damage. I started dreading visits that used to bring me joy. I rehearsed my words in the car before knocking, reminding myself to stay small, stay careful, stay agreeable. Love had turned into something that required permission. I cried alone more often than I ever had in my life. Not loud, uncontrollable sobs, but silent tears that came while washing dishes, while folding laundry, while lying awake at night replaying conversations I wished I could rewrite. I wondered how I went from being needed to being tolerated. How a woman who built a family could suddenly feel like an outsider looking in through the glass. I stopped offering help. Stopped suggesting meals. Stopped reaching for my grandson unless he reached for me first. I convinced myself this was maturity, that stepping back was respectful. In truth, I was disappearing to avoid being pushed. Every silence felt safer than another reminder that I no longer belonged. The worst part wasn't Melissa's behavior. It was my son's absence within it. His quiet acceptance cut deeper than any sharp word. I told myself he was stuck, torn, doing his best. But late at night, when excuses no longer worked, I felt the weight of the truth. I had become something he was willing to lose to keep his life comfortable. My thoughts turned inward, cruel and relentless. Maybe I really was too much. Too old. Too present. Maybe my time had passed, and I was clinging to a place that no longer existed. Those thoughts sat with me, heavy and persistent, until even my reflection felt unfamiliar. One evening, after a visit that ended with polite smiles and cold goodbyes, I sat in my car and couldn't turn the key. My chest ached, not with anger, but grief. Grief for the woman I used to be, and the family I thought I had. I realized then that silence hadn't protected me. It had only taught them I would accept less. Something hardened in that moment. Not hatred, not bitterness, but resolve. I wiped my face, straightened my back, and understood that if I kept shrinking, there would be nothing left of me to save. I didn't know what I would do yet, only that something had shifted beyond repair. And once that kind of change begins, there is no going back to who you were before. The tension didn't explode all at once. It sharpened. Visits became performances where I watched every move I made. Melissa no longer hid her irritation. If I reached for a glass, she watched. If I stood too close to the counter, she cleared her throat. Her control wasn't loud, but it was constant, like pressure applied slowly until something cracked. The day it finally went too far started like any other. I arrived with groceries, thinking maybe a small kindness could soften things. My grandson ran to me, hugging my legs, and for a second I felt normal again. I stepped into the kitchen out of habit, setting the bags down, reaching for a spatula without thinking. That was all it took. She snapped so suddenly the room froze. What did I say about touching things? Her voice was sharp, cutting through the air. Before I could respond, she grabbed the spatula from my hand, her fingers tight, deliberate. The message was clear. I was out of place. My son stood there, silent. My grandson stared, eyes wide. Heat rushed to my face as embarrassment washed over me. I murmured an apology I didn't owe, stepping back as if I'd crossed some invisible line. My heart pounded, not from fear, but humiliation. "This is my house now," she continued, louder, making sure everyone heard. "I don't need you rearranging things. Please just sit down and don't touch anything." Each word landed heavier than the last. I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller in a space I once filled with love. Then she lowered her voice, leaning in just enough for me to hear. "And don't forget," she said calmly, almost kindly, "none of this is yours anymore." That sentence did something to me. It wasn't anger that followed. It was clarity. I looked around that kitchen, at the cabinets I helped choose, the appliances I paid for, the family I thought I was part of. I realized she wasn't angry. She was confident. Confident that I was powerless. Confident that silence meant surrender. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I slowly removed my coat, folded it neatly over my arm, and smiled. Not because I felt weak, but because something inside me had finally settled. I understood then that asking for respect had only invited disrespect. That kindness without boundaries had taught her exactly how far she could go. As I walked toward the door, I felt lighter, steadier. She thought she had won. She thought humiliation was the end of the story. She had no idea it was only the moment everything changed, the moment I stopped reacting and started deciding. I replay that moment often, not because it hurt the most, but because it changed me the deepest. Standing there in that kitchen, I finally saw everything clearly. Every sacrifice, every swallowed word, every time I told myself love meant enduring discomfort. It all came rushing back as I stared at the counter, the floor, the walls that once felt like home. I could hear my own breathing, slow and steady, even though my heart was racing. Melissa stood there waiting for a reaction. Tears. Anger. Anything she could point to and use. My son shifted uncomfortably, still saying nothing. My grandson stayed frozen, caught between confusion and fear, watching adults teach him what power looks like. I thought about the first Sunday I cooked in that kitchen, my sleeves rolled up, laughing as sauce splashed onto the stove. I remembered handing over envelopes of cash without a second thought. I remembered believing that love, given freely, always came back in kindness. Standing there now, I understood how wrong I had been. Melissa mistook my silence for defeat. I could see it in her posture, her relaxed shoulders, the certainty in her eyes. She believed she had drawn the final line, put me in my place. What she didn't realize was that she had finally pushed me past caring about her approval. I picked up my coat slowly, deliberately. No shaking hands. No tears. I met her eyes and smiled, not sweetly, not apologetically, but calmly. That smile confused her. It wasn't the reaction she expected. She stepped back slightly, just enough for me to notice. As I walked toward the door, I felt something lift inside me. Years of self-doubt, guilt, and quiet shame loosened their grip. I wasn't leaving because I was weak. I was leaving because I finally understood my worth didn't need permission. Outside, the air felt colder, sharper. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting it steady me. I knew then that I would never beg for respect again. I would never explain myself to someone who benefited from misunderstanding me. That kitchen wasn't the battlefield. It was the wake-up call. I drove home in silence, hands steady on the wheel, my mind clear in a way it hadn't been in years. Somewhere between their house and mine, a decision formed fully, solid and unshakable. This was the moment I knew I had to do something, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. And once that line was crossed, there was no turning back. Once the decision settled in my mind, I didn't rush. I didn't storm into their house or lash out. I let patience be my weapon and quiet strategy my shield. I began by reviewing every document I had tucked away for years, deeds, trusts, old financial records, and the original will my husband had carefully drafted. What I found was empowering. I realized I still held the levers of control legally, firmly, irrevocably. I contacted my lawyer, not in anger, but with calm precision. We updated paperwork, clarified inheritances, and structured things so that the grandson, my son, and anyone deserving would be protected. Melissa, unaware of any of this, continued her routine, confident that everything she thought she controlled was hers. She didn't know that the rules had changed quietly, invisibly, and irrevocably. The first small victories were subtle. I noticed Melissa's tone shift slightly when she realized certain decisions no longer rested in her hands. The confidence she had carried like armor began to falter, almost imperceptibly, but I saw it. The sense of entitlement that once radiated from her every movement now met invisible barriers she hadn't anticipated. I didn't gloat. I didn't create spectacle. Revenge, I had learned, was more powerful when it was patient, intelligent, and inevitable. Every step I took was deliberate, measured, lawful. I watched as her certainty unraveled without a word from me. The same family dinners she had once dominated now required her to ask permission, her voice tempered with restraint she didn't enjoy. Every adjustment, every legal safeguard, was a quiet reclaiming of dignity. I had not sought to humiliate or punish Melissa out of malice. I sought justice, fairness, and balance. I was simply ensuring that what belonged to me, and what I had earned with a lifetime of sacrifice, could not be dismissed or erased. By the time she realized the shift, it was too late. Control had quietly passed from her hands back to where it belonged. I watched the subtle panic flicker in her eyes during ordinary conversations, and it was deeply satisfying, not cruelty, but the rightful consequence of arrogance and entitlement. I had touched what she thought she owned, the inheritance she assumed would be hers automatically, and it changed everything. The same woman who once ordered me away from a kitchen now found herself negotiating on my terms. I had not needed confrontation or drama. I had needed clarity, patience, and the courage to act when silence would no longer serve me. And in that quiet, methodical way, the scales began to tip. Justice didn't scream. It whispered. And sometimes, the whisper is louder than any shout. The aftermath was quieter than I expected, but no less satisfying. Melissa finally confronted me, not with anger, but with caution, the certainty she once carried nowhere to be found. Her voice was measured, polite, as if she had suddenly realized she was negotiating with someone who would no longer be dismissed. She tried to mask it with civility, but the tension was unmistakable. I met her calmly, almost gently, because there was no reason to be anything else. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't desperate. I simply was. My son finally spoke, his voice hesitant but sincere. He acknowledged the shift, the boundaries that had been ignored for far too long, and the respect that had to be earned, not demanded. For the first time in years, he stood beside me not as a mediator, but as a partner in fairness. Watching him reconcile with the truth was quieter than drama, but it carried the weight of something long overdue, accountability. Melissa lost control of the house, the decisions, the assumptions she thought were hers forever. Her arrogance crumbled under the weight of legal reality and quiet strategy. I didn't celebrate her loss with glee or vindictiveness. Instead, I observed it with calm satisfaction, the kind that comes when justice is neither rushed nor reckless, but inevitable. The house remained a family home, but on terms that reflected fairness, loyalty, and respect rather than entitlement. I, on the other hand, gained something far more important than legal authority or property. I regained peace. I could walk through rooms I had once shared without shrinking, without fear of being silenced, without the gnawing weight of humiliation. The boundaries I had set were now respected, the dignity I demanded quietly enforced. Even my grandson noticed the change. The air felt lighter, conversations warmer, and the tension that had silently plagued family gatherings evaporated. Melissa adjusted her behavior, not because of threats, but because the balance of power had shifted quietly, undeniably. She had learned, perhaps reluctantly, that manipulation and entitlement can only carry you so far. In the end, the consequences were clear and fair. Those who sought to erase me learned that some things cannot be taken without acknowledgement. And those I loved, the ones who mattered most, could finally see the strength and determination that had been quietly building all along. I had won not through anger or confrontation, but through patience, strategy, and the unwavering resolve to protect what was rightfully mine. For the first time in years, I exhaled fully, knowing that justice had been served and peace reclaimed. Looking back on everything, I realize now that kindness and patience are powerful, but they must be balanced with boundaries. Silence can protect, but it can also make you invisible. There is a point when enduring too much no longer serves anyone, it only allows others to take what they shouldn't. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I learned it fully, and I will never forget it. Never underestimate the quiet strength of someone who has loved, sacrificed, and been pushed aside. The same hands that once gave without question can also hold firm when it matters most. Respect, dignity, and fairness are not gifts to be earned by entitlement, they are rights we owe to ourselves. Protecting them doesn't make you cruel, it makes you wise. I hope my story reminds anyone watching that allowing yourself to be diminished doesn't help anyone, not even the people you love. True strength often comes in silence at first, but eventually, it must become action. The moment you realize your worth, you can no longer accept less than what you deserve. In the end, I didn't need confrontation, anger, or vengeance to find peace. I simply needed clarity, patience, and courage to act when the time was right. Melissa learned a lesson about entitlement, my son learned a lesson about loyalty, and I reclaimed something far greater than property, my dignity and my voice. So, to anyone listening, remember this: kindness should never come at the cost of respect, and silence should never be mistaken for weakness. Protect what is yours, speak when it matters, and never let anyone make you feel invisible in the life you built. Life will test your patience, but it will also reward your wisdom. And sometimes, the quietest victories are the sweetest of all. That's my story. That's the lesson I carry. And I will carry it proudly, knowing that even after betrayal, love, and loss, it is possible to reclaim both peace and strength.